Earlier today, GBNews' own Charlie Peters revealed an horrific story that detailed what happened to Sam, the grooming gang survivor from Oldham, who was gang raped and ignored by the police. After she went to a rape crisis centre, she was given the morning after pill. This is what happened.
I put the pill in my room and then I went out. The following day when I came home from being with friends, there was an officer sat in my mum's living room and my parents were in the kitchen, and he was quite vocally aggressive, telling me how important it was to take it. He had already gone through my room and found it and produced it in the living room to me. He popped it out the box and tried and passed it to me to take. I refused and said, I'm not ready, and walked off to go upstairs. He followed me into the hallway and he grabbed my arm and then grabbed my face and pushed it into my mouth to swallow and said, it's for your own good.
This is so appalling to hear Sam from Oldham's story. It's perhaps the most brutal of them all and is emblematic of why Oldham Council asked for a national inquiry. Indeed, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has tabled an amendment to tomorrow's Children's Wellbeing Bill to force a national inquiry into this consensus-shattering phenomenon. And yet the amendment will almost certainly be defeated. So twice in just over a week, Labour looks set to turn down an opportunity to do what is right for the victims and the country. As I said yesterday, Labour is hiding behind the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse from 2022, but this is untenable. We know that roughly 50 towns are affected by grooming gangs. IICSA covered only 6. Labour says that local inquiries are the answer, but the local ones do not have legal powers to summon witnesses, to take evidence under oath or requisition evidence. Local reviews can also be compromised by the councils themselves. Charlie Peters reported in the summer that whistleblower Maggie Oliver claimed the 2 leaders of the review resigned because they were prevented from accessing information they needed. At every turn, we've witnessed obfuscation, frustration and manipulation. Now is the chance for Labour to bring an end to the cover-ups and restore the trust that this scandal destroyed. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined now by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Suella, thank you very much for joining me. This scandal is so appalling, the information that's come out, almost unreadable out in a public arena. It's so deeply shocking. What seems to have been the problem, though, is that nobody was willing to enforce the law because they were worried that they would be accused of being racists.
Yes, Jacob, you're absolutely right. If there's one way of distilling this scandal, one of the biggest scandals our country has seen in recent years, down to a root cause, it is that there was countless instances when the authorities, people with powers, people who owed duties of care to these vulnerable children, police officers, social workers, teachers, counsellors, and many, many more who knew about what was happening, were told by the victims themselves about these heinous crimes, and they turned a blind eye because they were scared of being accused of being called racist. They were scared of causing tension to community relations. They were scared of rocking the boat. And this seems to be a prevalent feature in this scandal. It's an injustice and disgusting.
Now, we were in office for a long time whilst this was going on. Now it's Labour's responsibility. But it's not really party political, is it? It is a cultural thing that the British establishment, for want of a better term, absorbed political correctness, thought that multiculturalism was axiomatically a good thing, and therefore didn't want to point out that white girls were being raped, molested, tortured by primarily people from a Pakistani community.
Yes, exactly that. And what we've seen is a squeamishness and an institutional fear, an institutional cowardice, as I would call it, to tell the truth. And officials and professionals covered up, abuse. They covered up most horrendous exploitation because they didn't want to put their heads above the parapet and they didn't want to expose themselves to the claims of racism. And it's a symptom of the failure of multiculturalism. It's a symptom of wholesale professional failure. And it's a gross example of where political correctness has actually caused horrendous pain and suffering to thousands of young girls.
And is part of this problem the legal arrangements around protected characteristics, that officials, bureaucrats are under particular pressure not to treat everybody equally, but to treat them according to their protected characteristics? And this undermines the basic principle of equality before the law.
Yes, I think there's some truth in that, Jacob. I think the notion of protected characteristics finds itself in the Equality Act and has its genesis in international law and European law, European rights law as well. And what that really does is it divides people. It divides people by physical characteristics, and it does it, and it obliges public sector equality duty, something that you've railed against vociferously on your show, obliges the local authorities to make sure that minority groups are given special treatment effectively. And that is one contributory factor to this scandal. There's been a real fear to challenge injustice because the perpetrators were members of a minority ethnic group. And that was seen as far too radical, far too draconian an approach for professionals to take.
And isn't this a threat to the whole idea of multiculturalism? Don't we actually have to have some confidence in our own culture, that the British culture, the British way of life, indeed Western culture more broadly, that has been an amazingly civilizing and successful culture, is a good culture, actually a superior culture, that one that allows the rape of young girls?
Exactly. The British values, Judeo-Christian culture that we must subscribe to in Britain, that made Britain great, that was the foundation of Western civilization, which propagates respect, the rule of law, respect and equal rights for women, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of religion. You know, these liberties, these fundamental liberties, and civility have been, are define what I see as Western values, British values. But unfortunately, there are many people who come into this country and they don't subscribe to those British values. In fact, they take, for instance, their views of women. They treat women as chattel. They see women and Western women as objects that they can abuse and exploit. This is totally at odds with British values of tolerance and respect and civility. And that's why multiculturalism has failed. This grooming gang scandal is a symptom. It's not a cause, but we have to look at who we are as a nation. This whole episode is really raising up a mirror to our country, and we have a big question to ask ourselves. Are we going to stand confidently behind those values that you just talked about, that made our country great, that have made Western civilization great around the world? Or are we going to cower and bend the knee to outdated, outmoded, and frankly harmful values that are undermining our country?
Well, I think you make such an important point, and we settled this actually quite a long time ago, that if one looks at what John Locke was saying about religious toleration, just at the point at which the country is accepting people have a right to follow different religions, he says that you should tolerate other people's religion, but not if they want to break the ordinary law. And he uses the example of human sacrifice, that if there is a religion that wants human sacrifice, they can worship whatever gods they like, but they can't have human sacrifice because that is against the law. And this should surely apply to culture as well as religion. People are entitled to talk about and follow and have tolerated whatever culture they want, but they must never be allowed to break the basic law of the land.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, again, another way of putting that is that, you know, in England, there's a real notion of civility. Dare I say gentleness. I think that there is a characteristic of respect and equality that is renowned in British culture and the temperament of this country and these people. And I think that over time, that temperament of civility, welcome, friendliness, camaraderie has spilt over and got so weak into not standing up robustly for what we believe in and what we stand for and what defines our great culture and our great country, such that it's now been subsumed and taken over in some parts of our country by a culture that is not at odds with British values. And one example is the treatment of women. Another example is not learning the English language and expecting the state and others within the majority community to communicate in another language. That's not Britain. If you come to this country, you speak our language. If you come to this country, you sign up to our values.
And the two come together, don't they? Because a lot of women in minority communities are sometimes not allowed to learn the language, because if they don't know the language, it is easier to hold them in subjection and easier to give them the impression that things like Sharia courts are the law of the land rather than simply tribunals that they don't have to follow, and that we need to have confidence in our own institutions and recognise that our civilization is great and is good, and that people who come here should live within it.
Absolutely. We have, listen, my parents came to this country from Kenya and Mauritius. They came here with a gratitude and an adoration of Britain, what Britain has done in the past, what Britain stands for in the present, and what she means in the future, and a wholesale, enthusiasm for the British culture, British way of life, British traditions, and British heritage. We can have successful stories of people coming to our country and being part of our country and playing a full part in our society. But if you're coming to this country and you're saying women are second-class citizens and men can own these women and men can mistreat these women and we can carry out female genital mutilation and we can use the law of Sharia or we don't need to learn the English language, that's not conducive. That's not conducive to a civilized society. And that's why I think it's incumbent on all of us who really love our country to stand up for our values, stand up for them loudly and proudly.
Suella, thank you very much indeed. The Assistant Chief Constable, Greater Manchester Police, Steph Parker, said, "We wholeheartedly apologise to all victims of child sexual exploitation whom we badly let down, including Sam, for the hurt and ongoing trauma caused by what happened. We have accepted that our actions fell far short of the help that they had every right to expect from us. We continue to work with Sam, and the abuse she suffered is one of a number of ongoing victim-focused investigations by our specialist unit investigating non-recent CSE, which has 100 dedicated detectives working at a pace survivors are comfortable with when the time is right for them. This has seen more than 100 arrests, with suspects continuing to be taken to court to face justice." Well, I think that's a reassuring statement. We get a lot of these statements, but that one's actually proper. Thank you, Suella.